The United States was designed by William Francis Gibbs and Cox, Incorporated. Gibbs wanted to build an ocean liner that was worthy of competing with the elegant, large, luxurious liners of Europe. The United States would cost around $78 million to build. The United States Navy would pay for nearly $50 million to the total cost of the ship, with the stipulation that in the event of the outbreak of war, the ship could easily be transformed into a military transport vessel as well as a hospital ship. While William Francis Gibbs would design the ship to compete with the size, speed, and luxury of the competition, the U.S. Navy demanded a high degree of safety and structural security, as well as ship speed. The fireproofing of the ship and the high degree of compartmentalization were factored into her design, as well as luxury and passenger comfort, as well as the speed of the ship. In fact, up until the United States, the last U.S. ship to break and hold the transatlantic speed record was the Baltic. The Baltic was a ship that was in the Collins Line and had been back in 1854, and the trip was made in 9 days and 16 hours from Liverpool to Sandy Hook. William Francis Gibbs wanted to improve upon the ship he designed in 1940, which was the SS America. The SS United States was built by the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Newport News, Virginia. Maritime Commission number 2917. Her keel was laid down on February 8, 1950. Her hull was completed on June 23, 1951. She would have a high degree of compartmentalization. This was a precautionary measure in the event that she would be damaged during wartime. In that event, she would have the ability to stay afloat. This was one of the demands set forth by the United States Navy. In the event of wartime, the ship could easily be converted to accommodate soldiers for transportation. This would also include each one of her engine rooms to be separate unto itself in the event of flooding and damage. The ship's construction was made up primarily of non-flammable materials. This was not only limited to the structural parts of the ship, but to her furnishings as well. The design of the interior of the ship was done by Dorothy Markwald. She worked for Smith, Urquhart, and Markwald. They were familiar with Gibbs and Cox ships, having worked on them for many years. The SS United States, her furniture and fabric were made of glass, metal, and spun fiberglass. This was a detail ran right down to the clothes hangers, which were made of aluminum. There was very little wood used in her construction. It was limited to the bilge keels and the galley countertops. Even the ship's grand piano was made out of fire-resistant wood. In fact, even her handrails were made out of anodized aluminum, a material which was smooth and corrosion-free. Her superstructure would be made out of an aluminum alloy, and much like the construction of an aircraft, there were open areas of the frames to cut down on the overall weight and increase the speed of the ship. Her hull would be made out of steel, and the width of the ship was limited to 106 feet. It was limited to ensure that the ship would be able to safely pass through the Panama Canal, the Panama Canal being 110 feet. She would be a transatlantic ocean liner class. She would gross 53,329 registered tons. Her length would be 990 feet, or 301.8 meters long. Her beam would be 101 feet, 8 inches, or 31 meters. She would be propelled by 4 Westinghouse-geared steam turbines, which would deliver 248,000 standard horsepower. At 184,909 kilowatts, she had 4 propellers, each with 5 blades. They would produce a white wake in the water from the stern, which would be visible for miles, with an average top speed of 35 knots. She would be equipped with 19 elevators. 10 would be for the passengers, 8 for the crew and cargo use, and 1 that would connect the officers' quarters with the engine room. Her complement would be 913 first-class passengers, 558 cabin-class passengers, 537 tourist-class passengers, as well as 1,036 crew members. She would be so large that each of her manila fiber mooring ropes had a circumference of 9 inches and had a strain tolerance of 31.5 tons. She would have a theater, which would easily accommodate 352 people. She also offered a ballroom, a swimming pool, as well as a gymnasium. The ship had 23 public rooms, 395 staterooms, and 14 first-class suites. In all, over 3,100 workers took 2 years and 3 months to complete and deliver the ship. The SS United States would be ready for her sea trials in June of 1952. She would generate 241,785 standard horsepower, which would result in a speed of over 39 knots. In fact, the accompanying U.S. naval destroyer would be unable to keep up. It would later be understood to keep the ship's speed a secret, and it was reported that the ship's speed exceeded 34 knots. She was also able to race at 20 knots in reverse. The maiden voyage of the SS United States took place on July 4, 1952. She would depart New York and head to Southampton. She would be captained by Commodore Harry Manning. In the transatlantic crossing, the United States would shatter the transatlantic speed record previously held by the RMS Queen Mary, a title which she would hold for 14 years. The United States would beat her time by 10 hours. Her total cross time from eastbound crossing would be 3 days, 10 hours, and 40 minutes. During that time, she would have an average speed of 35.59 knots. The United States would then break the westbound crossing speed record as well. She would make it back to the U.S. in 3 days, 12 hours, and 12 minutes. In her first season alone, the United States was able to achieve 90% capacity, and during that span, she would carry a total of 69,231 passengers. In the years that would follow, she would have her share of world celebrities, political figures, and Hollywood royalty travel on her. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor, Salvador Dali, Walt Disney, Marilyn Monroe, Cary Grant, John Wayne, Duke Ellington, Judy Garland, just to name a few. The SS United States was even featured in the 1962 movie Bon Voyage. Other films she was in would be Gentlemen Marry Brunettes and Munster Go Home. Toward the end of the 1950s, there was a shift in travel plans from passengers to ships to the faster air travel options. A combination of labor costs as well as strikes also took its toll on the SS United States service plans. And on November 7, 1969, the ship headed for Newport News shipyards for what was to be a scheduled overhaul of the vessel. Initially, the ship would be overhauled and then returned to service. However, the plan to return would be canceled, and the ship would be laid up in New York. Through the following years, several organizations would attempt a plan to restore the great ship to service. Such organizations included the Federal Maritime Commission, the U.S. Cruise Lines, Turkish investors, Norwegian Cruise Lines, and Star Cruises, among many, but the plans were never followed through. In 1999, the U.S. Foundation and the SS United States Conservancy successfully had the ship placed on the National Register of Historic Places. In all, the SS United States served for 17 years. During her sailing career, she would be commanded by 3 people. Her captains would be Harry Manning, who had the fame of being co-pilot to Amelia Earhart, John Anderson, and Leroy J. Alexanderson. In 1969, the SS United States was served as a reserve ship for the U.S. Navy. The ship was hermetically sealed while in her berth to preserve the interiors of the ship. This would protect the engines as well from corrosion and damage. She would have the ability to be opened and reused at a time of need. The ship stayed in this state until 1978. At that time, the Navy decided that it no longer needed the ship. The ship was then sold, and since that time, there have been many owners. In 1984, in order to create revenues, fittings and furniture of the United States will be auctioned off. The auction would start on October 8th, 1984, and run to October 14th. In all, approximately $1.65 million were raised, and some of her artwork was sold and ended up in museums. The ship would later be purchased by a family in Turkey, and she would ultimately end up in Sevastopol shipyard, where she would undergo the removal of harmful asbestos materials. This would last from 1993 to 1994, and during this time the interior of the ship would be stripped down to the frames and bulkheads. In 1996, the SS United States made her last journey. She headed up the Delaware River. She was so large that her radar had to be removed from her to fit under the Walt Whitman Bridge. She was brought to Pier 82 in Philadelphia. As of this writing, September 22, 2021, the SS United States still sits in her pier in Philadelphia. She is under the care of the SS United States Conservancy. They are hopeful that plans to redevelop the ship as well as the building of a museum will happen sometime in the future. In the meantime, I will put a link in the description to where you can donate to help preserve this great ship. You can also read up on her amazing history as well as learn as the crew who served aboard her as well as the passengers she carried.